Rule number 3. You do not hear the knocking at your doors or windows.
After the events which transpired on the night of October 31st, 1986, many residents of Eastridge County now believe the area to be cursed. Regardless of what you believe though, one thing is certain: never be caught outside past 6 p.m. We've got quite the exciting series to cover today. This is certainly one I've seen the masses ask I talk about for a while now, and I certainly understand why. Dreams of an Insomniac, created by Postra, is a pretty recent analog horror that at first glance seems to be taking a more unique approach when it comes to its art style and presentation. What's especially interesting is that it seems that we the viewer have our own character as we traverse this harrowing world. Now that's something I don't think I've seen done before. As always, be sure to check out the original series before coming on over here for us to dive deep into what could be going on. But without further ado, let us get comfy in our beds and suffer the dreams of an insomniac nightmare. But before I let you get too far, just wanted to say, as of our last video, we have hit 100 videos on the channel. It was now over a year ago since we first entered the world of analog horror, and as some of you may have noticed, it definitely began a trajectory for the channel's future, and I for one can't thank you all enough for allowing this to happen. However, if you're new here and enjoy your watching, be sure to hit all those neat buttons down below, and if you want to support us further, I'll have links down below for the Instagram and Letterboxd, as well as the community Discord server where you can hang around and chat with like-minded horror fans and leave recommendations for what you'd like to see covered. But anyways, now you can pass through. Dreams of an Insomniac, Volume 0, Haunted Halloween PSA. Remember when I said that you are a character in this world? Well, the first thing we see gives us an overview of who exactly we are so we can get a good idea of our new identity. Your name is Tommy Merrick. While visiting your old family home, you stumbled across a strange box of tapes in the attic. Out of curiosity, you decided to watch them on your old CRT. You think they might be haunted. While watching the tapes, you began to see and hear things that weren't meant to be there. For some reason, they felt oddly familiar to you. This is Dreams of an Insomniac. Our first tape opens up and we learn of a bizarre incident that occurred in Eastridge County where a local Halloween store, Grimzo's, was robbed. Store owner Rick Graham reports seeing the door smashed into pieces when he came for his shift. All the shelves are all over the place and a ton of stuff is smashed. Oddly enough, it's reported the only thing that was stolen was a singular costume, but the money was left alone. You'd think money would be top priority. Perhaps someone was just that desperate to participate in trick-or-treating. I'm not the only one who finds the situation very bizarre. The rest of the Eastridge community seems to have similar questions, and since no security footage was able to be collected, no one knows who the culprit could be. Our reporter goes on to interview Sean Grimm, who is labeled as a skeptical civilian.
Oh, if you ask me, this whole story is just a bunch of malarkey.
You don't say. He seems to believe that this whole story is either exaggerated or entirely fabricated so that this newspaper company can get some big scoop in a small town. He also seems to take offense to the idea that this newspaper wrote a story about the town's representative being corrupt, but he promptly gets his audio cut off before anything further can be said. Before this part of the tape ends, however, we are warned not to trust anyone who is seen wearing this spooky inmate costume, which I imagine was the only one missing from the store. It's unclear when this specific incident took place, but obviously it had to have been close to Halloween. Maybe it's safe to say it happened the morning of Halloween. But our next segment takes us right to the holiday. Breaking news reports that 6 children were reported missing this Halloween night. Given the size of this small county, that's a pretty big number. It also stated that the disappearances started right at 6 p.m. and ceased an hour later. Looking back at the description for the teaser trailer of this series, it does state that you don't want to be caught outside past 6 p.m. I don't know what it's like where y'all are at, but 6 p.m. is when trick-or-treating starts. Looks like everyone was mindlessly in grave danger. Our reporters go on to interview someone who was a witness to the crime, Alex Williams. He states that everything was going on as normal until a mother begins running around claiming her child is missing. A group tries to help, but one after the other, more and more people are reporting their child as missing, and that's when panic ensues. We are then presented with the names and photos of the children that were lost, and I gotta be honest, they're a little freaky looking.
Hey! You can't talk to my son that way!
But nonetheless, it's important that they are found. Luckily, however, an eyewitness was able to give a bit of a description of the culprit at large. an orange costume resembling that of the inmate costume that was stolen, as well as a long tail, black mask, bright yellow eyes, and a large smile. I certainly hope that's all a part of the costume, or else we're dealing with something out of this world. A new character known as Officer Kruger comes out and issues a statement declaring he will be doing everything in his power to find these kids, and to bring the culprit behind these kidnappings to justice. Something a little off-putting to note is that once his photo begins to fade, we can see a different, more sinister looking photo lurking behind him.
Will be brought to justice.
There goes my peaceful night's rest. All residents are then advised to keep indoors, lock all doors and windows, and avoid anyone seen wearing this specific costume. You don't have to tell me twice. The next bit we get takes us to 3 years after the original incident, and we got ourselves a tape from the Eastridge County Police Department. Apparently we are going to be getting an inside look at photos taken from the security footage inside Grimzo's. I could have sworn nothing was able to be recovered from those cameras. We also learned this incident took place on the 6th of October, a bit away from the Halloween disaster. At 6 a.m., it appeared the lights turned on all by themselves, yet nothing seemed to be around the store, and then 6 minutes later, all the items appeared to be thrown around and damaged. You're telling me this happened on October 6th at 6:06 in the morning? That could be a clear sign as to our culprit. Still no sign of what could have caused this. Well, until we get to our next image. At the time, the photo of this first contact and the eyewitness drawings were the only two pieces of information on what is now being referred to as the Eastridge Demon. That is, until today. Remember Officer Kruger? Well, it sounds like he had a run-in with this creature, and it certainly had an effect on him. According to this tape, it took years of extensive physical and mental therapy for him to get to the point where he could inform detectives of what happened during his run-in. Luckily, in his act of bravery, we were able to get a better understanding of the abilities this demon possesses. Unfortunately, one of these abilities is causing hallucinations to those close by. So if you're one of these unlucky officers tasked to this case, it's required that you operate with another officer. Also, be sure to take note of your surroundings, and don't trust anyone if you are under the suspicion that you are hallucinating. It's also very important that you avoid any physical contact with the demon, something Officer Kruger wasn't successful at. And we can see just how damaging that contact was in a scene I admit made me jump a little.
The most significant of these abnormalities include discoloration of the skin.
The post-attack photo of Officer Kruger is left censored, but if I had to guess, that hidden image we saw earlier behind him is a good indicator as to what he looks like now. From all the warnings we get as the police tape continues on, I can't imagine what can be done to stop this thing. It says that if you attempt to communicate with the demon, it can then steal your voice. Are we sure Eastridge isn't Mandela County in disguise? So from the sounds of it, there is one demon lurking the area causing mayhem. But we are also warned to not trust anyone wearing that familiar costume. Are these all figments of hallucinations casted on people? Or are there more creatures than this one demon running amok around this small town? We're now off to our next segment. Haunted Halloween PSA, 1993, bringing us ahead 4 years. I fear to know what developments have been made if this nightmare scenario is still going on 7 years later. First thing we see is a clip from the absolute peak Army of Darkness, before the emergency alert system takes over and interrupts our film,
Dad, we can't see the movie.
presenting us with The Rules of the Season, which is presented by the Lankmen Foundation, and we can see below has been illustrated by a Mortimer Gray. Our narrator is also the same voice who was reporting the Grimzo's break-in earlier in the volume. But the purpose of this PSA is to once again warn people that the Eastridge Demon, aka the Smiling Snatcher, will be out tonight. Does he only come out on Halloween? Or is this particular night made extra dangerous since the streets are basically a feeding ground? We are then presented with our set of rules to try to keep everyone safe from getting snatched up. Something to note here is that you can vaguely see our Snatcher's eyes in the frame throughout this whole segment. Looks like he's watching this PSA, which would give him all the intel he needs to avert these rules, I imagine. As previously stated, we need to remember the curfew, since the Snatcher comes out past 6 p.m. Next rule, as also previously stated, is to keep our doors and windows locked. I guess the Snatcher isn't capable of throwing a rock through the glass and getting in his own way. Rules number 3 and 4 are when our footage looks to get corrupted.
Rule number 3. You do not hear the knocking at your doors or windows. Rule number 4. hear the knocking at your doors. Rule number 4.
You say I don't hear the knocking, but I'm pretty sure I just did. The real rule number 4 is that if anyone comes to your door past 6 p.m., it's the snatcher wearing that person's skin. It's definitely time to pack my bags and move out of here. Something I've been really enjoying about this series so far is the fact that the art style is reminiscent of your typical children's cartoon. So when it quickly flashes real imagery on screen, it takes you by surprise and makes it all the more unsettling. Rule number 5, as it's been drilled in our heads, is to not trust anyone with that inmate costume. And the scene to end off this volume would leave anyone watching this PSA sleeping with one eye open for the rest of their life. We're flashed a series of images behind our smiling snatcher. We get photos of all the missing kids, the report of the Grimzo's break-in. We even get a clearer look as to what I believe is the present-day Officer Kruger, and boy, does it look like he's had better days. So ever since 1986, Eastridge County has been constantly terrorized by this demon, now known as the Smiling Snatcher. It seems like he strictly goes for kidnapping children, but he has no problem dismantling any other person that stands in his way. And the effects of coming into contact are severe to say the least. The corrupted narration near the end of the PSA is leading me to believe that this could be the Snatcher's voice replication ability being displayed. Given all his other horrific antics, it wouldn't shock me to find out that he has been misinforming the public to make it easier to get his next victim. In loving memory. Given the title of this tape and the image that fades into view, I think it's safe to assume we've lost Officer Kruger. But given his last state, I don't think his life was all that worth continuing. However, our description gives us an update as to how our own character in this world is doing. After viewing the first tape you found in the attic, you found yourself too afraid to put another one in your VCR. Trying to figure out what you saw, you went to bed that night to try and get some much needed rest. But those things you witnessed, those things you heard, they kept you up. The curiosity began to eat away at you. So you went back to your CRT late into the night, and despite your fear, you put in another tape. I wouldn't be surprised if those knocks we heard near the end of Volume 1 was something our character Tommy Merrick was hearing while watching the tape. After the image of Kruger, we return to Sean Grimm, and it looks to be him rehashing what he was saying in the last tape. Except this time, the people behind the camera tell him that no one is going to believe what he's saying, and they are just trying to sell a news story. Was this incident fabricated? They mention that they are now running out of time, and resort to using a previous cut, likely the one we ended up seeing in Volume 0. We then get presented with an official memorial video for Kenneth Kruger. Wait a minute, it says he died in 1987, but in the 1989 police training tape it said he gave valuable information as to the Snatcher's abilities. The news not being truthful and fabricating stories? Now that's unheard of. The fact that they said he hung himself in his son's closet is especially wild and disturbing. We're even shown a note he had left behind. There are some parts of this letter that can be made out, but most of it is unintelligible. The report says that the disappearances that happened in '86 took a huge psychological toll on him, hence leading to his death. But we now know not to trust anything being said here. We're given a number to call in case we ourselves need help, and that we're not alone. But the text very quickly changes over to "You are alone. This place will be your tomb." And to end this tape off, we're shown what fate actually awaits Officer Kruger.
Why won't you let me die?
Because I still have use for you yet.
It's apparent that someone is purposefully keeping him alive. They still have a use for him. If this new date is correct, then Kruger ended up passing in 1996. But again, how trustworthy is this info? Perhaps he's being kept alive so that he can continually provide more information on either the one or potentially multiple demons haunting Eastridge. It wouldn't be too far-fetched to also think he is being subjected to a multitude of tests, making the remainder of his life a living hell. While the voice at the end doesn't sound too familiar from anyone we've heard prior, they are labeled as the Doctor in the end credits. I've got my eyes on the Lankman Foundation that provided that PSA in Volume 0 about the Snatcher, considering they seem to have the most information about it, and about how to keep yourself safe. No other perfect subject than the guy who had direct contact and didn't instantly die from it. Family photo album. Looking through the collection of tapes once more, you find a set which seems out of place. They're kept in a separate box with the name Alex Williams crudely written on it with what looks to be a cheap black marker. Looking inside, you can see that all the tapes within are labeled as being part of a Foundation archive. Curiosity gets the best of you once more, and you put the first tape you find into your VCR. I have a feeling our curiosity is going to be our downfall. Also, if you recall, Alex Williams was the guy interviewed about the first Halloween incident. Did Alex manage to sneak into the Lankman Foundation? Perhaps he worked there. Needless to say, our character Tommy got a hold of a lot of important tapes one way or another. Also, in classic analog fashion, viewing of this tape is only meant for authorized eyes, and I bet our eyes aren't among those. On January 6, 1987, the police department received a call from a distressed man claiming something was trying to break into his house. However, once the officer arrived, anyone who may have been living in the house were reported missing. The only evidence found was a family photo album and a camcorder, which luckily contains footage of the events that transpired that night. Look at this very happy family. It's confirmed that all the photos within the album were heavily and horribly distorted, which made it extra hard to identify anyone in the album. We then played what was on the camcorder, with the matching date and the label Search Number 6. All we see is someone walking through the snow, before we cut to another photo from within the album labeled First Night Out, showing a picture of one of the children. When detectives asked the neighbors trying to identify the people in the pictures, they all weren't of much use, going so far as to say no one has ever lived in the house, as if they never existed. We then return to the camcorder footage with our same character traversing the snow, until a child's voice sinisterly calls out to the cameraman.
Sammy, is that you?
At this point, it's pretty clear this guy's whole family, or at least one of his kids, had gone missing. Sounds like the work of this smiling snatcher. He tries to call out to his son once more, and the voice just claims to be behind him. Then a bright orange light blasts towards the scene, and a face comes up from the dark. If I had to guess, that bright light is the glow from the snatcher's eyes. As we've seen prior, they fit that same color, and just visually, it's really cool to see that effect they have. We then get our next photo, Goodbye, and it sounds like the culprit is still a mystery, even though we know it's more than likely our smiling snatcher, as this fits his work. The department has at least come to the conclusion that whatever attacked this family is more than likely inhuman. Back to the footage, our cameraman is hauling ass away from the snatcher. He makes his way back home, and we can hear the phone call he makes to 911. His call doesn't last long, however, as very soon, our snatcher returns, presumably using his son's voice and his appearance.
Why do you keep using his face? Why are you doing this to me?
It sounds like the snatcher was able to just convince this guy to go towards the snatcher. He does say that he has his entire family, so he might as well just join them. Big question here is if all these missing kids and this guy's missing family were all killed, or if they are being used for something a lot worse. If anything, we know that this snatcher has a strong ability of influence over its victims. The police then arrive at the scene, and we see as the officer finds the photo album. The photo we are presented with next is just labeled I love you, and it's said to be the only clear photo of the perpetrator, looking like your regular sheet ghost. Simple, but very effective. I imagine, since this is the same design used in that Lankman PSA, is that to anybody other than the victim, the snatcher appears as this sheet ghost, but the victim may view it as the person the snatcher wants to disguise themselves as. It certainly sounded like the snatcher was using this guy's kid as a disguise, so perhaps once a photo was taken, we saw the true form, and not the hallucination our victim was under. Dreams of an Insomniac, Volume 1, Foundation Archive. Leading the narrative of this volume is our familiar character Alex Williams, who describes that after what he had seen on Halloween night, he had to be put under witness protection. However, his description of witness protection seems more like they just wanted to get constant information out of him, going so far as to basically coax him into getting a job at the Lankman Foundation. An interesting thing to discover is that he refers to the people being quote-unquote helped by this foundation as Veldegen victims. Sounds like we have a new term for our smiling snatcher, or perhaps smiling snatchers. We glitch out and are then presented with an introductory video for when the Lankman Foundation was first brought to life. Mr. Lankman, you look an awful lot like a smiling snatcher to say the least. We also hear another familiar name, Mortimer Gray, the person who animated this whole tape, and if we recall, was the guy who illustrated the PSA we saw in Volume 0. His ties to this foundation is making me suspicious of that name now. Our animated variant of Mr. Lankman basically confirms that there isn't just one demon haunting Eastridge County, but a whole species of them.
4 years ago, our lovely town was plagued by a species of creature we have come to know as the Veldigan.
This tape also takes us to 1990, considering he states the first event was 4 years ago, aka that first Halloween incident. This Lankman Foundation gets more and more suspicious the more this guy keeps talking. For starters, they plan to contain the Veldigan under the same roof as victims of the attacks? That makes sense. He also was able to create this foundation using his inheritance left by his father, and renovated and reopened the old Lankman Asylum, turning it into a treatment center. That can only yield helpful results. But in an act of good, the foundation donates generous amounts to the Eastridge Police Department, which I'm sure totally doesn't mean the police force is now in cahoots with the foundation. If we have any questions, we're presented a phone number to call, to which we immediately hear a phone ring, and are played the only archived phone call to 911 about a lady reporting multiple people trying to break into her home.
Eastridge 911, where is your emergency?
There's a group of men trying to break into my house. They're slamming on the door. Please send the police now!
The operator on the other end, very slowly, tries to get more information as to what the people trying to break in look like, and after she gives her description, he hangs up on her. Like I said earlier, they're definitely in cahoots. The lady starts filming the incident, and we can certainly hear as someone or something is trying to break into her home, and we then get a full look at our culprit. We then return to Alex Williams, who describes being bombarded with training tapes and very odd rules at the Foundation. An example as such being that all were required to wear these special goggles, suspiciously reminiscent of the goggles worn by our home intruder we just saw. Supposedly these goggles were meant to avert the hallucination effects of the environment, likely due to the mass amount of Veldigan they had stored there. As he continues describing his experience, it becomes more and more clear that these patients in the Foundation are just being used as test subjects. Why else would they house victims alongside the dangerous creatures? Yet it also sounds like the Foundation is causing other hallucinogenic effects and we're being written off as some kind of exposure therapy, and to keep patients in line. Hence why employees must wear the goggles so it doesn't affect them, just adding to the fishy nature of this place. We are then shown one of the tapes Alex was talking about, the exact one about the goggles. When we see the symptoms of the optical hallucinations, we learn the environment around them will begin to warp, seeing people that don't exist, and the most telling of all, entryways and exits appearing or disappearing. When it comes to auditory hallucinations, the weirdness keeps getting added, specifically hearing the voice of Dr. Lankman. I gotta say, a lot of these symptoms seem to be the exact type of hallucinations the Veldigan use against victims, like the knocking on doors and windows, and the music. We're then introduced to the caretakers, who coincidentally look now exactly like the home intruders, and other staff members are to have no interaction with them. I think it's safe to say a lot of these patients were brought here against their will, like the lady we heard earlier, and more than likely, Officer Kruger. Returning to Alex Williams, he goes on to describe a situation he witnessed that sounds like our lady we heard earlier, and confirms my suspicion. She was taken by these caretakers and brought to the Foundation, even though she was displaying no signs of what usually brings patients in. Later that night, however, the lady begins screaming out of nowhere, and Alex goes to investigate. He reports seeing 4 of the caretakers dragging her away from her room and taking her off somewhere unknown. This is what led Alex to begin his investigation so that he can inform the general public the truth of what was happening in this asylum being disguised as a treatment center. Since no other employees wanted to get involved, he sneaks into the lady's room and records an interview with her, to which we then get to listen in on. He sits down with her and asks her why she was even brought in, to which she describes what we were suspecting, They broke into her house and basically kidnapped her. His next question is where she was taken when the caretakers dragged her away, but it sounds like she is under strict orders to not tell anyone, unless she wants to be taken back. She finally gives in and tells him she was brought to room 66. But before we can learn anything else, someone who I can only guess is Sir Lankman decides to interrupt.
They took me to room 66?
No, that's not possible. There's only...
Alex tells us that after that, caretakers dragged her off again, and Alex was sent back to work as if nothing happened, and he never saw her again. Sounds like room 66 became her new home. But what makes the idea of room 66 so bizarre is that the asylum only holds 65 rooms, so there must be a secret one. We did hear earlier that a symptom of not wearing the goggles could make entries and exits appear and disappear. Room 66 is likely one of these areas, meant to be kept secret from the employees by using the goggles to keep it hidden. When Alex goes back to look at the footage, he sees a camera in the corner of the room, which he reports never seen cameras before in the rooms of patients. He returns to the asylum and makes sure no one else is around, and in a frightening move, he removes his goggles. Lo and behold, everything looks the same, and he comes to the realization that this foundation could have easily hid cameras, people, and even rooms from the employees, making the existence of this room 66 all the more possible. So Alex returns to the foundation late in the night with his camcorder to help him see all the things being hidden through hallucinations. He makes his way and finds the doors to room 66, and he's rightfully terrified to find out what is on the other side. And if I'm being honest, the reveal on what's through the door is pretty fucking awesome. Dr. Lankman appears and Alex is cornered, and he has now finally experienced what these patients had to endure, and he gets his first real look at Lankman.
For the first time, I saw his face.
We return once more back to Alex in his room, and in an odd turn of events, he tells us that he was just ordered to get back to work, like last time, made to pretend nothing happened. But Alex is afraid that someone is out to get him now. He tells that they have made him research a dangerous person, and once the Foundation no longer finds use of him, he's done for. The final message is left for us, as well as an archive of tapes he has left so that we can uncover all the lies and all the information unknown about the Foundation. He's meeting up with this person once the message is over, and it's likely he will never be seen again. However, to end off this tape, it looks like Alex wasn't alone at all during this recording.
It just feels good to finally get this off my chest.
Granted, this could just be a cool frame to have the credits roll over, but I wouldn't be surprised if Sir Lankman was sitting in the background listening to all of this. Before it's all over, however, we get our last update as to our own character's adventure. After watching the collection of tapes, you knew what you had to do. Late that night, you left your home, hitching a ride with a taxi and making your way towards the place you saw on the tapes. You didn't know what to expect when you arrived there. For all you knew, it may not even be around anymore. The thought of what you might see there terrified you, but filled with a new purpose, you marched towards it regardless. Your driver dropped you off far from your destination, not wanting anything to do with where you told him you were going. And so you walked. For hours, you walked along a pathway of dirt and gravel, passing through a part of the county that felt like a ghost town. It had been so long since you stepped foot here, yet everything felt so familiar. The moon loomed high overhead when you finally arrived at your destination, the Lankman's Asylum. The place was now boarded up and abandoned, a husk of its former self. You stood in front of the entrance to it for what felt like an eternity. You knew what you had to do there, but you didn't have the strength to do it. Eventually, the dread became too much to bear, so you turned away and got ready to walk all the way back. But then you heard something, a bellowing, calling to you from deeper within the forest. You recognized the creature's call, and moved beyond the asylum as you ventured into the forest to meet someone you never thought you'd see again. And that puts us up to date on Dreams of an Insomniac. Granted, this series is still pretty fresh and new, so I'm sitting here with quite a bit of questions. But it definitely seems like the Langman Foundation has no interest in helping anyone who walks through their doors. Or I guess is forcibly brought through the doors. I have a suspicion that its sole purpose is either research on these Veldigans, or just to aid them. I wouldn't be surprised if people are brought into this place and are just given to that giant creature who I imagine is this Winfrey we see in the credits. It's difficult to come up with a stable theory as of this moment, since a lot of what we have learned seems to be misinformation provided to us. Which would make sense considering a lot of the information was provided by the Langman Foundation, and we know how honest they are. I imagine on Halloween night of 1986 was the county's first encounter with this strange new creature we now know as Veldigans. Whether or not this was solely the public's first encounter is unknown. It's entirely possible this foundation was well aware of these things way beforehand. But what we do know is the Foundation likely also has Officer Kruger as another test subject. Hopefully he didn't have the same fate and was fed off to that Winfrey. I can't wait to see where these next volumes end up taking us. I would love to learn more about the truths of Eastridge County and what exactly is going on behind the scenes.
The whole story is just a bunch of malarkey.
But I'm positive most is at the hands of Langman, who honestly appears to be a Veldigan himself. It wouldn't shock me to find out that Veldigans have been in control of the narrative for a long time now, completely fooling the public into doing its bidding. I also wouldn't be surprised if our character Tommy was the old friend of Alex's he had mentioned prior. That is, if Alex is still alive. I would highly recommend you all check out Dreams of an Insomniac, since it's filled with really impressive imagery and a unique art style, alongside a very retro 80s horror soundtrack, which is something a lot of analog horrors don't really have. I would go so far as to say the music throughout the series is certainly one of its highlighting features. And man, if we get more designs like Winfrey, I'll be all for it. It looked like a scene straight out of Doom. Maybe Doom Guy is the only one who could save us now. Something I haven't really seen before as well is the inclusion of us as a character, putting us in more than likely the present day of this story, or at least furthest in the timeline considering the asylum is now boarded up and abandoned. Unless this is before everything that took place. It is labeled as the Langman Asylum. Maybe we're the character that starts the whole thing. A good question to leave us off, I suppose, but it's highly unlikely. But if you made it all the way to the end of this video, I thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed, be sure to hit all those neat buttons down below, and be sure to keep leaving me recommendations, whether in the comments or even the community Discord. I'm always peeking around through there and seeing what you all have to say. But other than that, I just heard a knocking at my window, and feel I should check that out.